Hello and welcome. I'm Tanya Davidge, the Executive Director at Open House Melbourne, and I'd like to welcome you all to Designing with Country. It's wonderful to see you all here, although I'm less able to see you all now with these lovely lights. It's wonderful to have you. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have Councillor Jamal Hakim from the City of Melbourne in the audience tonight, and so I'd like to welcome him as well. We're all here to kick off the first event of the Open House Melbourne July Weekend Festival, and we're pretty excited. Our theme for 2024 this year is Rediscover Your City, and we're asking people to reconnect with old favourites, seek out new places, and look at the city from a different perspective. Every year it is our honour, absolute honour, to present Designing with Country in partnership with RMIT's Yulendj Weelam Lab. And this year we'll be looking at home from a First Nations perspective. I'd like to invite Bo de Bell to the stage to acknowledge country on behalf of Open House Melbourne and the Yulendj Weelam Lab. Bo is a Gamilaraay man, the RMIT Vice-Chancellor's Indigenous Pre-Doctoral Research Fellow and co-leader of the RMIT Architecture and Urban Design Yulendj Weelam Lab. Welcome, Bo.
Good evening. I would like to take a minute to explain the purpose of an acknowledgement of country and why it's actually important. The dreaming or the dream time is actually a term that was misrepresented or misinterpreted between a conversation between the Aranda people in central near Alice Springs and Francis Gillian, who was out there recording language and things of that nature. The Aranda people were using the word Alkringa. My father Alkringa, his father Alkringa, his father Alkringa, everyone Alkringa. And the philosophy behind the really simple explanation was an all time, an eternal past and an eternal future. This has been taught to me as the story of the land. The story of the land is actually what the acknowledgement of country shares. It shares acknowledgement of that with those of us who are here present and recognises our place in an eternal story on a land that we recognise as sharing with those who have stood here before us. An acknowledgement of country is not about ownership. And we as Aboriginal people understand that we don't own the country. In fact, we're no different from country. Each of us owns our own story. And at this moment, in this place and on this land, in the story of all time, our stories are one. We share this moment with the Boon Wurrung, and all the people of the Eastern Kulin Nations, the caretakers of this land's story, the elders who have stood here before us, and those who have not yet stood on this land with us. We are connected to each other in this moment through the story of the land. And like always, I forget something. Please welcome Christine Phillips up.
I'm a bit shorter than Bo. Thank you, Bo, for those very powerful words, and thank you to Tanya Davidge, also Pierre McLean and the Open House Melbourne team, along with the RMIT Architecture and Urban Design School for the opportunity to present the 2024 Designing with Country series. Wominjeka, welcome. My name is Christine Phillips. I am a non-Indigenous architect currently working full-time as a senior lecturer in architecture at RMIT, and I'm also co-leader of the Yulendj Weelam Lab from the RMIT School of Architecture and Urban Design. It's great to see some of my architecture students here. Thank you for all coming. Welcome. I would like to acknowledge that we are on unceded lands, the BIC of the Boon Wurrung and the Wurrung language groups, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, especially to Ngawi Professor Carolyn Briggs, who's been a great leader in this city and instrumental in establishing the Yulendj Weelam Lab at RMIT. The Yulendj Weelam Lab is an Indigenous-led team of both non-Indigenous and Indigenous design practitioners and academics working together to ensure Australia's built environment respectfully engages with and supports our First Peoples' knowledges, cultures and perspectives. And I'd like to add that Yulendj Weelam in the Boon Wurrung language, and the name of the lab was gifted to us by Ngawi Carolyn Briggs, means deep knowledge of home. And I think that's really at the heart of what we're going to be talking about this evening. As a non-Indigenous architect, I continuously reflect on what it means to design, work and live on these unceded lands. This is my purpose. What does it mean to design on land that has over 80,000 years of culture and knowledge embedded within it? And how do we reconnect with that knowledge in a very meaningful and respectful way? This year's Open House Melbourne theme is Rediscover Your City. So this evening, we're considering that in relation to First Peoples' perspectives of home, what this means within the context of the design of our cities, landscapes and built environments. So much of our urban and civic environments ignore the sovereignty of our First Peoples. It ignores the fact that this has been home to those peoples, to their knowledges, practices and culture for in excess of 65,000 years, possibly 70,000 and more. How can our built environments better become home? Home to the knowledge and culture of our First Peoples, reflecting the deep knowledge of that home. How do we understand our place within that home? What practices will bring us home, make home a home in which we can truly belong? With this in mind, tonight's session will focus on just these very questions, and I'll be chairing this conversation with my colleague Jock Gilbert, who is a non-Indigenous landscape architect and co-leader of the Yulendj Weelam Lab. Jock, I invite you up to introduce our speakers, and please, our speakers, join us here on the stage.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Tanya, and thank you to the Open House team, including Pearce. Your work is just incredible and adds such depth and richness to the city that we live in, that we call home. And thank you, Bo, for that wonderful acknowledgement. It was really, really fantastic. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that, well, first of all, my name's Jock Gilbert, as Christine said. I'm a non-Indigenous landscape architect and acknowledge the tremendous debt, that the debt of recognition, I think, that we are actually on and occupying and talking tonight on unceded stolen land. As it happens, I was born and raised on Aranda land, not far from where that kind of misheard conversation happened. I currently reside and came down here today from Boon Wurrung land, where the season is rather bleak, it has to be said. So we're looking forward to that turn of the season when the ducks and the magpies start to get active again. And also acknowledge the deep debt of gratitude that we all share with Professor Ngawi Carolyn Briggs, and the knowledge that she's shared with us, that she's poured into the lab and that she continues to pour into Melbourne. And the generosity with which Ngawi Carolyn always extends a welcome to us all onto her country, and the kind of the beautiful message within that welcome, which is also to say, what is your intent? And as Christine, I think, spoke of, our intent tonight is to speak of home and to understand what it is for those of us who are non-Indigenous design practitioners to practice in and on someone else's home. and we'll open that out a little bit tonight as we move through proceedings. But it's my very great pleasure now to introduce our panellists. I'll actually start with Sophia. Sophia is a Barkandji weaver and PhD candidate. She's also a mother, a daughter, an auntie. She's a PhD candidate in the RMIT landscape architecture discipline, and she's joined us today from her home country of Golgol. And Sophia reminded me today that Golgol is actually the Barkandji, in Barkandji language means kal, which means to meet, to come together. So there's a kind of few really nice sort of synchronicities happening tonight. As I said, Sophia is lots of things, and in those things she is also importantly an elder and a community leader within her home community at Golgol and actually right throughout Barkandji country up to Wilcannia and beyond. We've been absolutely privileged to have enjoyed the relationship that we have with Sophia and her family, and we pay a great debt of gratitude to that relationship and to the knowledge that's been shared. You know, in any relationship there's been ups and downs, but overwhelmingly we have an awful lot of fun. Importantly for tonight, Sophia is a storyteller. She's an amazing storyteller. She's got a wealth of stories and she'll share some of those with us tonight. Her specialty is weaving, and particularly weaving narratives of place, country and home, and locating that in the discourse and narrative of the place that we find ourselves in. Thank you, Sophia. Beau de Bell, RMIT University's Vice-Chancellor's Indigenous Pre-Doctoral Research Fellow, but not for much longer because Beau has just completed a magnificent PhD, and we're not yet, because of the bureaucratic process, able to refer to Dr. Beau de Bell, but very close to it. And he will hate this, but I have to tell you that, see, he hates it, that Beau's doctoral thesis was considered to be in the top 5% of theses ever examined on that topic. So it was amazing. The thesis integrates really strongly his Gamilaroi heritage into the doctoral research, and it was titled Message Stick Protocols. So there's something of that in what we're talking about tonight also. Investigating community-led architecture, Beau emphasises cultural protocols, sustainable development, blends Aboriginal traditions with modern techniques for social justice and ecological sustainability. That's an awful lot to take on, but good luck and welcome. Thanks, Beau. So we'll now, I'll cross the floor and we'll start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jock. Really appreciate you bringing that up. Well, the one thing I didn't do was thank all you people for coming out and joining us tonight. It's really fantastic. Like the middle of winter, the dark depths, even though there was some sunshine today, but we really do appreciate it. So thank you very, very much. Now, Sophia, you and I have worked together for a few years, probably getting on towards, well, I've certainly got more grey hairs than when we started out, probably 10 or 12 years. And over that time, I think I've seen the way that stories have layered, and you've used stories to convey your knowledge to me in a really sensitive and generous way. And I think another one of those really nice synchronicities is that 4 or 5 years ago, we wrote an article, we co-authored an article on the theme of rebirth, and we used, and it was talking about in landscape terms, the rehydration or the re-wetting of a billabong system on Sophia's home country, Culpra Station. And we co-authored that with some fairly upstanding people, including Tom Flugie, who I think is in the audience tonight. And that was all based, we used a story of rebirth as a metaphor, the story of Belilla the butterfly and Belilla's metamorphosis. And not long after we published that story, that article, with the story in it, I was lucky enough to attend a mansion in Brighton as part of the open house program. I think it was in 2021. And that the name of that mansion, of course, was Belilla. And it allowed me to start to put the kind of connect the dots, because Belilla is actually the name of a big station property on Sophia's country just south of Wilcannia. And so that was remarkable in itself, adding another layer to the story, understanding that, and that, Belilla Mansion is a magnificent sprawling stone edifice in Brighton. It's still set on 10 acres, I think, 56 rooms or something like that. That the wealth embedded in that one property was all extracted from that station property within the space of about 12 or 15 good seasons when the stock came in. So that was remarkable in itself. But I'm now going to throw to Sophia for the last, up until this point, layer of the story, which is, of course, the most beautiful and most poignant. So do you want to tell us how you got there and how that came about?
Well, can I just say thank you to both Chris and Jock and my colleague, my brother here, Bo DeBell. Just in terms of acknowledging that we're on somebody else's land. I've travelled over a few people's country to get here and acknowledge that I'm forever on someone else's country, even though I'm a First Nations Barkandji woman. This is not my land, but I recognise and pay respect to the elders and the country in which we sit on today. I'm Sophia Pearce. I'm a Barkandji woman. I've just learned to accept my eldership and that the bestowal of that title. Most of, I guess, my life has been about being on country, teaching my kids, once you become a parent and having to teach your kids about what their responsibilities to country are, and we all have that responsibility, I guess, to care for country, and it comes with a cultural responsibility that's deeply connected to place. So Belilla came about as a part of this beautiful project around the birth of the butterfly is the story of Belilla. But as Jock and I talked about that story and we co-wrote an article, Belilla in itself became, I guess we forwarded it down the track and Belilla in itself is about butterflies and the birth of butterflies and the seasonal change of cycles to spring. And they're the things that we look for as Barkandji people for me as a weaver, it tells me when I see those butterflies that it's time to look at harvesting. So the whole dreaming story that begins with Belilla, which Jock kind of alluded to, is that the word Belilla doesn't actually mean butterfly. So it was a early colonialist, white colonialist, Western colonialist view of the word Belilla. Do you want to know what the word Belilla actually means other than what we thought it was? So Belilla isn't butterfly, but it means embark. So I forwarded on and then had a yarn with some Barkandji language speakers, some really great friends of mine who spoke fluent Barkandji, and I was able to sit with them and talk about how do we translate this back into Barkandji language. And then what we did was look at the word of Balilla. Balilla actually isn't butterfly. So the lesson we learnt was that we talked about, well, how do you say Balilla? What is the word? What is the Barkandji word associated with that language around Balilla? Balilla actually means purposely soft, purposely beautiful. So I think when we look at the way white men's recorded our language, we as Barkandji people, constantly look at, well, what's the written text of our history? Because we didn't have that voice, but we were the vehicle for that voice was coming from a Western way of looking at our language, our culture, our place and the importance. But I think looking at the word as a description of what a butterfly looks like. So I think what happened was in describing what that is on that flower is Balilla, purposely beautiful and purposely soft. So I think over time we forward those early colonial recordings of our people and our stories who provided us a voice. But we flip it on its side and look at, hang on, we are now, 200 years of colonisation. We own that language. We are a part of that country that makes up that language. So being able to talk to Jock about, how do we then correct the wrongs of what this word Balilla meant? Because I think you got to say, butterflies as a part of the word that describes it in Barkandji language is one thing, but the word Balilla is the description of something that was purposely built, purposely made by our creation ancestors. So it kind of took on a new meaning, I guess, of what it really meant, that Balilla is. I don't know about this mansion in Brighton, that it could possibly be purposely beautiful and purposely soft. But I wonder even now if you look at the owners of that building, of that empire, my people, they say that the country's built on the back of the wool of sheep. Well, hang on. Balilla actually, the mansion out at Brighton is actually built on the work of my people, of First Nations Barkandji people. And along with that comes this whole story of connection to place and the importance of Balilla, rather than the word as a description of being a butterfly, was something that was, I kept telling Jock that I'm going to change my name to Balilla. Because, it adds this different layer of what we understood as what Balilla was. 200 years later, we're putting that blackfella light on what it means to us as Barkandji people. So it's kind of like, even though there is some recorded documents of these stories, it's us people who own those stories that are deeply connected to place. And obviously now I've connected to the rest of our team in terms of understanding, hang on, we made a mistake, because Balilla actually means something totally different to butterfly. But in the essence of what a butterfly is. There.
I mean, I think there is something incredibly powerful in that story from my perspective as a non-Indigenous architect. We're at a really interesting time in the profession at the moment in Australia. We have architects and landscape architects finally attempting to embrace how we might actually engage with Indigenous knowledges within our built environments. And we've had Ngawi Professor Carolyn Briggs up here a few years back on another Designing with Country talk saying, I walk around the city of Melbourne and there's nothing that reminds me of my culture, of my ancestors. And it's something we're all really trying to grapple with in the built environment professions at the moment. And I think there's a very powerful lesson in this idea of capturing the essence of country. And Bo, I wondered, as a Gamilaroi man, I mean, you sort of drive back and forth, you fly in and out, back and forth from RMIT and back home. And I think there's something to be learnt about being off country, which makes us all think about what it means to be home and what makes home. And I wondered from your perspective, what that experience of coming here to Melbourne is each time you come here to visit, and what the clues or what design gestures or marks within our city might create that sense of home, and how might we be able to capture the essence of country in relation to that beautiful story of Balilla?
Great question. I think to respond to that, I'd probably talk about the first time I ever came to Melbourne. We drove into Glen Waverley. I jumped in the train, popped out at Melbourne Central Station. I'm a bush kid. There was 4 buses around the city per day. So it was, public transport wasn't really a thing, where I won't say we're all single story in Tamworth, but it's not a very high rise, not very, there's a pretty clear view of the mountains, the hills, and for me especially, there's an essence of country there that makes that place feel like home. So the first time I came here, I popped out in Melbourne Central. I've walked, I don't know how many floors up into some big spire. And I was just completely lost. There was no context for me of country. There was no context of anything that actually made me feel like I connected here. Because I think the way that the city's evolved and the way that they've been designed and developed start to make it hard to see the cues for country. And so the first thing I did when I actually walked out the front of Melbourne Central was just sit in the State Library Square there in the park area for about 15 minutes and just map the shadows on the ground. So I knew where north was. I knew where I was sitting, and I knew the context of the city grid to north and solar north where I was sitting. So that was a marker for me, because country is everywhere. Country is, as I'm sure Sophia is going to lean into in a minute, there's a difference, not a difference, sorry, there's an equal of country on the ground as there is in sky. Sky country is just as important as earth country, as our mother. How do we create a built environment that responds or reflects those things is a challenge. And that's something that there's actually quite a number of very prominent First Nations people working through in the architecture sphere. It's a really interesting space. I'm not sure I have many examples that I can point at, but for me, it was the orientation.
We put this Maori example up here as a possible way in which this is a Maori-led practice. And I think it's pretty exciting times, because there are no right answers, and it's a time of experimentation. But I think your point about connections to the sun and sky country are really important when we're in a sort of dense urban environment, because we often lose that connection to sky and stars. Sophia?
Can I want to jump in, because I want to share with you. So I'm from the bush, red soil country, big sky, pretty flat. Maybe the bridge crossing, the Chafee Bridge crossing the Murray River from Victoria to New South is probably the highest point for us on flat country, red soil country. So when I first came, sorry, I shouldn't. I'm laughing at myself here, because when I first came to Melbourne, I was put into some student accommodation, and I cried. I wanted to go home. I got off that plane. I didn't know where I was. I was disorientated. I didn't know where the sun was coming up. I didn't know where the sun was going down. And I'm like, I ring Jock Gilbert and I said, I cried. I want to go home. There was nothing in this city that told me where I was as an Aboriginal woman, as a First Nations woman. So in the times that I do come to the city, I tried to send messages to where I was standing as to, I'm at this sculpture here and it meant nothing to me, but I thought it might have meant something to my colleague here. And of course, he was kind of like, no idea where you are. You need to keep walking down to, a certain point. But every time I come to Melbourne, I feel as a First Nations woman, I don't know this place. I don't know how do I find my way just from the airport, whether it's you're relying on a taxi man to, take you to where you need to go. It's usually given me very strict instructions as to addresses and, that Western way of mapping the place. And it's kind of like, well, I know I've got to go that way. But in reality of that, it was the most depressive, alienating place to be on as a First Nations woman, to be totally at a loss. I know I was off Barkandji country because, that's probably the spirit of the ancestors. You might call it God's country, but I'm sure people would think otherwise. But as a Barkandji woman, I think, and coming into someone else's country and being able to honour and respect the ancestors of that place, as a Black woman, as a First Nations woman, as a Barkandji woman, it's always important to recognise within ourselves. For me, it was about, I know whose country I'm on. I respect that I'm on someone else's country. But I also want to know, I want to see these mob. I want to see where these First Nations people exist in this place. And it's kind of hard to find my way. Bo and I talked about how do I find my way? So it was about, which was the home, which is a marker in our city, I suppose, in this place. How do I find my way? I can't see where the sun's coming up. I can't see where the sun's setting. I can't even tell whether it's lunchtime or not, depending on, and I got you rely on those white men's technology of phones and clocks, and because you can't always see star signs that would normally guide us as First Nations people. And it's really important for me to be able to understand that the elders of this place, I got in a cab, must have been yesterday, long, this morning, sorry. I got in a cab and I was telling this lad about, we come on Boundary Road and talking about what did that mean for Aboriginal people in this place. And it was really good because he understood he wasn't an Australian born, or maybe he was, but he was clearly not from my cultural background and maybe not as a First Nations or a first, I don't know, what do you call it? What do you call you fellas when you're coming to this country and you're an immigrant? Immigrant, is that what you call yourselves? I know you've been here for a couple of years, 200 years, bit of a spit. But you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of really beautiful to be able to have that yarn with him, and I don't know if he understood what it meant, but I talked to him a little bit about what it means to be Aboriginal people and what it meant to be able to enter and cross boundaries and in our own country. So it was really interesting. But those markers are still evident in this city if you're looking for them. But I think as First Nations people, we shouldn't be looking for them. They should be prominent in what we see, how we feel. And I thought about that sculptor this man, I don't even know what it was. But I thought, these are the things I look for to try to find my way. And I think as practitioners of the field which we choose to go into, you've got to kind of be consciously aware that we all come on someone else's country. We all travel on someone else's country. This country, wasn't destitute. It wasn't isolated. It was not empty lands. And we are still here and still being able to share the story of Balilla and tell those stories to my kids is one thing, but I think in the context of architecture and landscape and design, as practitioners of that, those are the stories that our people have given over time, but the interpretation of those stories have kind of distorted a little bit. But it's about me being able to take control and going back to the sister girls who speak fluently in those languages, my language, and to be able to talk about that. That's, to me, is about us taking ownership and us having a voice about our stories and our connection to certain places associated with dreaming stories that, from the sky to the ocean to flat red soil country. But, I think, I still giggle and tell that story about, just not being able to know where the sun rose and being disorientated. I might as well be in another country I kind of was, off Barkandji country. But what it meant for me to find my way in this place was a bit scary. And Bo and I talked about that. How do I navigate these places of Swanson Street, Elizabeth Street? It's like, I don't know. Somebody take me.
With a good story, I reckon. Story orients us. I think it's interesting off the back of that, talking about our first experiences here. Has it changed much for you now? And if it has, I guess, what are the markers or what are the places that you've found that made it feel more like home? It doesn't feel like home for me either. It's not our home. My home is Kamilaroi country. But coming here for the last 4.5 years has been a little bit of exposure, a little bit more exposure, a little bit more of understanding the story of the architecture that is in this place, understanding certain buildings and relationships that develop. This place is much more becoming like home for me, even though it will always be someone else's country that I'm on. Have you, in your experience, has that changed? Have you found markers that make it feel more like home?
Now he's really testing me about, what my market, apart from RMIT, that building with all the little circle thingies on the outside. So that's my, normally if I was on Barkandji country, I know that at certain points of the river system or red soil country, it becomes rocky country or it becomes stone country. You kind of know that. You see where the change in the soil and the colour of red soil becomes black soil and black soil becomes something else, and it, how close you are to the river. So those markers are really important when I'm on Barkandji country. I see nothing else but those things. But for me, the marker, I guess, for my point of, okay, I'm going to start from here. I've tried the Google Maps. It kind of doesn't work when there's so many descriptions of the little area where I am. So trying to find, that didn't work. So it was kind of like, well, I come from that direction, I must go back in that direction. But when you come out of that, so I use markers in the city that I still get lost. I'm telling you. I still don't understand why finding A to B is kind of like, well, how do I get on these trams? Do they stop or what? Do I have to flag it down and say, hey, So all of those things, being a First Nations person, that came to the city out of my own familiar surroundings, it was daunting, it was scary. And I still find that I break out into a sweat to think that I've got to go from A to B. And it might be just to go to the library or student services or to do something that is a part of this big institution that I belong to as RMIT. So RMIT is kind of it for finding my way as I get more familiar with this new place that becomes part of my home, and recognising Auntie Caroline's connection and Yulendj Weelam and that meaning of home. Home is red soil country. Home is where the leopard wood grows. Home is all of those things for me. But it's also about forming connections to our people, our mob. And I think having to have understanding from non-Aboriginal people that isolation of being off country helped. So I'm forever grateful for that.
What about you, Bo? Same question to you. So have you discovered any markers within Melbourne that tell you that we are on Boon Wurrung, Woiwurrung, the lands of the Boon Wurrung and Woiwurrung people over the years that you think really stand out? I mean, right next to the RMIT Design Hub is ARM Architecture's design of the Barrack building, which is probably the first time it is the first time we've seen an Aboriginal elder within our city at that scale. That's one kind of a marker, but have you come across any other markers?
Yes, is the short answer. I'm not sure many of them are going to be sort of the architectural equivalents that this conversation's kind of geared towards, I guess. It's become for me about orienting myself with the sun, understanding where the streets and the orientation of the grid layout, understanding the cross streets and the major ones.
He's mad on this cross grid layout. He taught me something about grid layout, and it was, it kind of helps get a big picture. But
yeah, it's a little bit Tetris: up, left, up, across. It's not quite as direct as sometimes we would take out a little bit less densely populated areas. With the story might follow a line in the, like Sophia was saying, a change in the soil, and that might follow its way through. So I do have different markers around the city that help me orientate myself. The tram lines is a great one. They cross on all the major intersections. It gives me a reference point to be able to go back to. So the grid layout's helpful, although that's probably the cause of the anxiety for understanding where the markers are anyway. So it's a positive. It is a positive thing when I've learnt to read that as the contemporary version of country that we're part of. So,
I mean, it is a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we're in this housing crisis and we're wanting to build and build and build, which is, clashing with our attempts to address climate crisis and all the rest of it. But I think it's a really important lesson to think about how our future urban environments can better engage with sky country, with sun, with the stars, and how we might actually begin to make stronger connections to all of those elements of country.
Can I butt in?
Of course.
Bo and I talk about the sun and where it's rising and where it's setting and all that. But the other thing I think for me, when I'm at home in my country, stars are to be able to see the stars, the stories that are associated with our star dreaming hero stories. I don't know where, I guess we all, as First Nations people, I don't we all have the stories of the Seven Sisters. I think you fellas call it Orion's Belt. We call it Kali Nunkoko, only women. And I think when you look at First Nations stories, and it kind of from west to east or east to west or north to south, there are those stories that we see for ancient civilisations have seen. The stars doesn't change in Australia to where you are, whether you're on Barkandji country. Might have impact on climate and, if it's cloudy, and because Barkandji country, it's so beautiful, it's never this cold, miserable. No. I'm just making that bit up. But Barkandji country is amazing in that, it's big sky country, and at night, those are the things that you set. Reading the rings around the moon, what sort of day it's going to be the next day. Those are the stories that connect us to our elders, to our past, to our dreaming, but they also connect us to the present, because nothing much changed up there. Even though Seven Sisters, we don't see the seventh sister because of whatever in the sky like we used to thousands and thousands of years ago. Us Barkandji people have a story about what happens if you see that seventh sister. And I'm not going to terrorise you because you've got to go home, and I want you to all have a good little sleep. No, it's not. But it's across the nation of Australia. There are commonalities of the sky, what we see in the sky and how those change. So we're always talking about country. You can't talk about country without talking about water and air and above and the sky and the stars. Everyone knows about the emu in the sky. And if you don't, come to Barkandji country and we'll show you what it's all about. But they're things that, we have a world of dreaming stories that we want to share with non-Aboriginal people. If you want to listen in a non-judgmental way, because that's our ontology, that's the way we see the world in which we live. And I think that's something that misses when we look at these built environments. For who are we building these environments? First Nations people should be first and most priority of who we are in belonging to this country. And I say country as in whether it's a localised country of Boon Wurrung or Wurrung or Barkandji, they've always been a connection to that place. When all the world was put together as one, we was lucky to be the First Nations of this little island they call Australia. But anyway, that's me ranting.
Oh, that's good. Sorry, I don't mean to. So I think it's the